So one other consideration on the topic of inheritance and modes of inheritance is this question of heritability. So up until this point, we've been following some of these genetic principles of inheritance, assuming that having a certain allele or allele combination genotype, having a genotype gives you the trait. And that's not always true, but you can still have genotypes that increase your chance of having a certain phenotype. So a lot of times these are disease, we call them maybe like a disease risk allele. What is, say you have in your family risk of heart disease, risk of cancer running through your family. Not everyone in the family has to develop cancer, and in some cases there's not a strict one-to-one relationship between your genetics at birth and whether or not you're going to develop cancer in your lifetime. So with all kinds of other factors, you can do one of these tests where you determine heritability, and we'll see sort of played out here as an illustration of the concept, and then we'll actually be able to sort of calculate it a little bit later. It gets into some heavy math, but I think the concepts are good for us to cover. So when we say something is heritable, heritability is a variation, or it comes from the same root word as inherit, obviously. We saw that a long time ago, something that is inherited from your parents. So heritable, heritability means that, as it says down there, the offspring have a phenotype that can basically be predicted by the parents' phenotype. So you'd expect that for something that has a genetic cause. And some examples here on the left, this has low heritability. What we're comparing, you could maybe think of height for an example here, if it helps you to think through this. Here we've got a range of the parents' heights on the x-axis here. So shorter parents, taller parents, and the offspring may or may not have height that reflects their parents' height. And in this case, it's pretty low predictor. So tall kids are born to shorter parents, and shorter kids are born to tall parents, and tall kids are born to tall parents. And the pattern is not very clear. This line falls down as more of a horizontal line. In this case, we'd have a situation where taller parents more often have tall kids, and shorter parents more often have shorter kids. And so this would be a feature that has greater heritability. So you could predict what a person's phenotype is going to be a little more reliably by knowing what phenotype their parents have. So the alternative, if something is not genetically heritable, we often break these down into features that are caused by genetics, so something that can be tracked to your DNA, or determined by the environment. And so in evolution, you often think about traits that are caused by DNA or the environment. So environment is this broad concept that kind of is the alternative explanation for why something is the way it is. And sometimes you get good examples. This is a good example from nature, flamingos. So flamingos are bright pink, right? Well, not always. So sometimes flamingos in the zoo are not quite so vibrant pink. Depends on what they eat. So it turns out that they get the pink in their plumage from the pink of the food that they eat. These are some crustaceans that they eat. And if they get a good number of these in their diet, then they pass on the pigment from the crustaceans to become pigment in their plumage. And so depending on what they eat, right? They eat diet rich in crustaceans, they get a color. So it depends not on their DNA. They're not DNA genetically programmed to become pinkish or whitish, but they can change that depending on how they eat in life. So there's a lot of traits that are interesting to study, but might not be caused genetically. In humans, there are plenty of examples, right? So we have diseases. Is a disease that somebody gets later in life, is that caused by the genetics of their parents? Is it caused by experiences they had in their lifetime? And so we're often looking to avoid getting diseases. What do we have to watch out for? Do we have to watch out for something our parents gave us in our DNA, or something that we might do during our lifetime? And as in many examples in biology, there's a pretty wide spectrum. So this is a nice image I got from 23andMe, showing a range of human traits that are of interest. This is obviously from a service that's going to tell you what your risk factors are by looking at your DNA, but it's not too far off. So we run from relatively low heritability for some features all the way up to very high heritability. Basically, they would look at your DNA, and these features off to the right that have a greater heritability, you'd be able to tell somebody with greater confidence that they will develop celiac disease in their lifetime or Alzheimer's disease and so on. Off to the left of this graph, you'd have a lower chance of looking at somebody's DNA and telling them that they're going to develop lung cancer or have a stroke in their lifetime. So for some people, this is predictive, but for most people, they don't have anything in their genetics that predicts the chance of getting lung cancer. So maybe think for a second, causes of lung cancer is on here, colorectal cancer, melanoma, or skin cancer. Lots of cancers are on here. And for the most part, they're often this not very heritable part of the graph. And maybe you could think of the explanation for that. These are things that we've been warned about, risk factors. So smoking and lung cancer, sun exposure and skin cancer, diet and so on contribute to some of these other cancers. That people can change their risk regardless of their starting genetics. They can have a different risk as they go through life through their environmental exposures. All right, so going back to something a little more quantitative, how do we determine heritability? One nice way to do that is through a twin study. So in a twin study, the scientists compare pairs of twins, and I've put on some images here. This is from a professional photographer who's documenting people later in life who are genetically identical twins at birth, kind of highlighting how they might be a little bit different from each other as they go through life. Maybe you know somebody who is an identical twin, and maybe you can tell them apart, maybe you can't tell them apart. But basically over time, they might have slightly different environmental experiences that change their appearance, their attitudes, their personalities, and so on. So in a twin study, you're comparing identical twins with so-called fraternal or non-identical twins. And let me just introduce the concepts here. So we call these monozygotic and dizygotic twins. So the zygotic of monozygotic and I'll just put in there, these are what we call identical twins, is a situation where during fertilization you have an egg and a sperm cell, and the result of fertilization is a zygote. And in monozygotic twins, I'll just call these embryos at this point. So the monozygotic means there's one zygote, and through a rare case, at some point this zygote, as it develops, it goes through cell divisions, and at some point those divided masses of cells become separate, and one goes on to become its own embryo, separate from the other. They develop into their own people, but at some point they were genetically the same. They were one cell. So monozygotic, one zygote. Dizygotic, they're twins because they were born at the same time. So dizygotic fraternal or non-identical twins. There's another unusual event that contributes to these, and this is the case of having one embryo, or sorry, I've got egg here, E for egg. One egg fertilized by one sperm cell and another egg fertilized by another sperm cell. So the unusual event here is that there are more than one egg. There are two eggs available, and each is fertilized. Each egg is produced through the process of meiosis. And as you probably heard this term, fraternal twins means that they're no more genetically identical than regular brothers and sisters. So dizygotic, two separate zygotes, genetically different. And these go on to become embryos and then people genetically different. All right, so the important difference here is genetically, as we saw in the pedigree content, siblings are 50% similar to each other. Identical twins are 100% identical to each other. And so you have a situation where two individuals are born at the same time. They go through very similar life experiences. And depending on whether they're identical or non-identical twins, they have more or less genetic similarity. So this third bullet point here, just think about that for a second. Twins have very similar life experiences, more similar than ordinary brothers and sisters. So if you have a brother or sister and you're separated by 2 years or something like that, you might be raised by the same parents, live in the same house, eat your family's same kind of food, but you're not as identical in your experiences as twins would be. So twins at the same age are getting the same meals, they're going to the same experiences, they experience the same heat wave or the same environmental exposure, long day at the beach or whatever it is. So they're more similar, and this is a kind of a cleaner way to do a study when you're looking at genetics. Obviously with humans, we don't get to manipulate people as far as their breeding or their life experiences. We sort of scientifically have to work with what is already out there. So we have a situation where people exist as pairs and can be studied if they are okay with that as far as what's going on in their life. So what we use these twin studies for are tests of what we call concordance. So concordance is kind of a fancy way of saying agreement. And a measure of concordance is if you take all these pairs and ask the question of whether they have the same feature. Obviously, in this case of identical twins, you'd have a lot that's similar, but you might have something that is maybe caused by genetics, maybe caused by environment, and you're not entirely sure. You'd be able to rule out genetics if you have, say, negligible difference between pairs of identical twins and pairs of non-identical twins. All right, so calculating this one out, we got 6 pairs here. And for this trait, asthma, 4 of them have the same phenotype. And the same meaning they both have asthma or they both don't have asthma. And then 2 of them have differences. One has asthma, one does not have asthma. So that's a 4 out of 6 factor for concordance. Right, maybe I need to spell that out more. So if we calculate that out, we have 4 that are the same out of 6 total. That would be 67% concordance. And asthma is one of those that it's not clear exactly what genetic cause is causing asthma in some people. Okay, so when comparing in one of these twin studies, you're comparing pairs of identical twins and pairs of non-identical twins and asking how the concordance compares between different kinds of pairs. So the environment in identical twins and non-identical twins should be about the same. As I mentioned, same temperatures and meals as they went through their young life. Whether they were identical or non-identical, but the identical twins would be more genetically identical. So anything that's more similar in monozygotic twins kind of leans you toward expecting more of a genetic cause. So as it says here, greater concordance among monozygotic twins than among dizygotic twins indicates heritability. And that's basically all we use it for in this class is there evidence of heritability or not so much? So here's a table showing concordance percentages in pairs of monozygotic and dizygotic twins and a variety of human traits that have maybe uncertain causes and who's got low heritability So if there was strong heritability, here's an example, heart attacks in females, 44% concordance in monozygotic twins. That's a lot bigger than 14% in dizygotic twins. So big difference in concordance, and the only difference is how genetically related they are. This kind of speaks to a more likely chance of genetic cause for heart attacks in females. You've got to run some statistics on some of these. You know, is 39 significantly bigger than 26? Is 47 significantly bigger than 24? A lot of these are considerably bigger. And then one of these, this cancer row, just like we talked earlier, lots of causes for cancer that are not genetic. A little hard to rule out or to zero in on the genetic causes, the causes that actually are genetic. So lowest heritability in this study shows cancer probably not a significant difference, but actually showing up as less concordance in identical twins than in non-identical twins. And then we have all kinds on here. So there are kinds of cancer that are known to have a genetic predisposition. Maybe you know about something like that in your family. But just in general, if you take cancer overall, there's much more of an environmental signal to getting cancer than genetic.